Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Covenant Eyes podcast. I am your host today, Theo McManigal. I'm the Catholic Church Outreach Specialist. Karen Potter's doing well. We just thought we would give her a little bit of a break today. So, just before we get into today's episode, please remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel to continue getting our podcasts and our other great content. So I'm very excited about today's episode. We have with us Dr. Peter Kleponis, who in the Catholic world among therapists is definitely someone I see as an expert on this issue of pornography. So we are very, very happy to talk with him. Dr. Peter, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me today.
Oh, thank you for coming on. So can you just start by, and I know it could be, a long story, maybe even a podcast episode in itself, but could you tell us and our listeners how you got into being a therapist, as well as how you decided to study more and specialize on this issue of pornography?
Well, both were kind of sort of by accident a little bit. So my original career was actually in financial services. And I realized early on I'm not a number cruncher. But I liked helping people. I liked talking to people and helping them solve their problems and everything. So we're going back 30 years ago now, well over 30 years. I decided in my mid-20s to switch careers and retool. I went back to school. Had to go back to school at night for a year to get some undergrad credits, and then grad school for 3 years at night. And finally, 97, got my master's and began this journey as a therapist.
Kleponis, who in the Catholic world among therapists is definitely someone I see as an expert on this issue of pornography. So we are very, very happy to talk with him. Dr. Peter, how are you today?
And how I got into specializing in pornography.
Thank you for coming on. So can you just start by, and I know it could be a long story, maybe even a podcast episode in itself, but could you tell us and our listeners how you got into being a therapist, as well as how you decided to study more and specialize?
In fact, for many of the married men, it was actually their wives that were calling up seeking help. So I noticed this trend and I decided to study it a little further to really see what's going on out there. So I did my research, and what I discovered was that there was this whole epidemic of internet pornography addiction going on out there. But nobody wanted to talk about it. I'm just plugging in my computer here. Nobody wanted to say anything about it. It was still a taboo subject. But I realized that, hey, we got to do something about this. There are people that need help. So again, I went back to school and retooled. I went through actually 4 separate certification programs for the treatment and sexual addiction. And then I just sort of became, the expert in this field, and started doing a lot of speaking on it. What happened was in 2010, I was asked to give a conference to the priests of the Archdiocese of New York. Which is very interesting. And of course, when you do something for the Archdiocese of New York, it's like playing at Caesar's Palace. Everyone finds out about it.
Mm-hmm. Biggest Archdiocese in the United States.
The country talking about this, and then writing books and I created a recovery program. So it really became a passion of mine to help people who are struggling with this, both the people addicted to pornography and often spouses who felt really betrayed by this and dealing with betrayal trauma because of it. So that has sort of been my journey here.
And your work on this is expansive. You've written books. As you said, you've been around a lot of the country, if not, and the world. I think you've said, right, to speak on this.
Traveled internationally, yes.
Obviously, you're working with clients on this, and you're really, having an impact on the way the world and the church approaches this. Mm-hmm. You also, along with your practice, you're involved with our friend organization, Integrity Restored,
yes.
Which also is the name of your book, Integrity Restored, Helping Catholic Families Win the Battle Against Pornography. And I think, isn't it also kind of the name of your practice or another one of your websites?
Okay, I use Integrity a lot. So my book was Integrity Restored. And from that, we've created our nonprofit educational organization, Integrity Restored 2. My recovery program is called Integrity Starts Here.
Okay.
And my counseling practice is Integrity Counseling Services. So that's sort of the word that kind of ties everything together.
Which came first? Was it the book?
The book came first.
What led you to write the book?
Well, actually, going back, again, I think around 2012, I was invited down to EWTN to be on Jeanette Bankovic's show, Women of Grace. And, we actually did several episodes and it was really good. And she asked me if I would write a brochure for her, a little pamphlet for her viewers that she could send out on pornography addiction and recovery. Well, that pamphlet ended up being 100 pages. So she said, okay, well, we will publish it as a little book. And we did. That was my first book. I believe it was published in 2012. It was called The Pornography Epidemic, A Catholic Approach. And it was great, but I realized there was so much more that needed to be said about this, so much more. And that's when I set out to write my next book, which was Integrity Restored. And I didn't realize that became sort of a seminal work, because even though there were a few other people that were writing about this, such as Matt Fradd and so forth, I was the only, actual mental health professional that was working in this field that was writing on this in the Catholic world. There was a lot of work done in the Protestant world. It's amazing. The Protestants, unfortunately, they're light years ahead of us in this. We Catholics, we have to catch up. Actually, fortunately, they are, because they've got some really great models there that I work with. And in fact, in the Christian world, most of my training in the treatment of sexual addiction is from various Protestant programs, which I'm eternally grateful for.
Definitely.
So
including us here at Covenant Eyes, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're primarily a Protestant program.
Yes, it's excellent. So I wrote Integrity Restored, and it was very well received. A couple of years ago, we actually did a second edition of it. So it's done really well, and I've been able to update it, and I plan on continuing to update it. And then from there, I developed a program for this, for helping Catholic men struggling with pornography addiction. And that's where my next book came from. And that was kind of interesting, because as I was working on developing this program, I had a binder that I had full of papers and handouts and articles and all kinds of things that I was using for the men that I was working with. And it was a very successful program. And one day I looked at that binder and I thought, oh my gosh, I've got a book here. So that became my workbook, Integrity Starts Here, which is my recovery program for pornography addiction recovery. And it's worked very well. And I'm actually going to be soon starting on a new edition of that. Again, because
Fantastic.
there's always new information coming out, new treatment modalities and things coming out. So I always want to...
New stats.
Yeah, keep updated. And then I realized, I was working with a lot of couples. And there really was not a lot of information out there for Catholic couples whose marriages had been affected by pornography addiction. And out of that came my fourth book, which is called Restoring Trust, A Couple's Guide to Getting Past Porn, published by our Sunday Visitor. And that book was great, because in it I discussed, the addicted spouse and his or her disease, the traumatized spouse and his or her woundedness, and then also the wounded marriage and what needs to be done to heal that. So, it really covers everything that's needed there. What happens to a marriage because of pornography as an addiction, but also how to heal that marriage. So every step of the way was just kind of noticing these different needs that were out there and working on trying to fill those needs. So, it's not like I, one day sat down and said, gee, I think I'd like to write 4 books. No, it's just, rows. I figure, well, somebody's got to do it. It might as well be me. And that's how it all happened.
That's fantastic, and we're eternally grateful to you for it. Let's elaborate on a little bit of the last one you were talking about, marriages, pornography and marriages. Tell us about how pornography use impacts marriages, how it damages marriages, and a little bit of what you do to help couples heal.
Pornography use has an incredible impact on marriages. Because, and it's a lot of it's because how men and women view it. A man may view pornography simply as images on a computer screen. Everybody does it. What's the big deal? But to his wife, those aren't images. Those are other women. All right. So for them, this is a form of adultery. It's a form of infidelity. And you think how horrible it would be for a woman to discover that her husband is having an affair with one woman. Imagine her finding out that he's having affairs with hundreds of women out there, because that's
Yep.
the way she views it, and she feels hurt, she feels rejected, she feels inadequate, she feels like there's no way she can compete, because of course the women in pornography are always very young and they have perfect bodies, and of course we all get older, and our bodies change, and that has an incredible impact on them. So what they end up experiencing is actually a form of trauma, a form of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, that we now call betrayal trauma. And it can take years to heal from that because it hits to the core. Nowhere do I see more damage done by pornography use than to wives. It really hurts them very deeply. And this is what men have to realize. And I truly believe if every husband out there really understood how this would hurt their wives, no one would ever want to touch porn. Right? It's like rat poison. You don't want to touch it at all. Yeah.
That was my experience, right? I mean, I had a little bit of a fall during our engagement period. I was the one who came out about it, but I saw, and that was enough to keep me away. But for this day forward, going on 4 years, but it's not typically magic like that, Dr. Peter, is it? Getting married will solve my problem.
No.
It's not how it works.
No. Because the issue, it's not about sex. Men think, well, I'm looking at porn because I want a lot of sex. I'm in my 20s and the hormones are going crazy. I want a lot of sex. So if I get married and I can have sex whenever I want, that'll solve the problem. Well, that solves it temporary, but most of the time they go back. Because the pornography, you see, this addiction, it's not about sex. It's about escape. Mm-hmm. That's what it is. Escaping into a fantasy world where you're in control, right? So, and it isn't, and it's amazing because I work with so many men who are dealing with this addiction and they feel so much shame. They think that they're some type of sick pervert. And I say, well, look, the behavior is just the symptom. That's all it is. I'm not concerned about that. I want to get to the root of it. What is driving it? And 90% of the time that it has nothing to do with porn. Or nothing to do with sex. People say, gee, you're a sex addiction therapist. How can you sit there and talk about sex all day? I tell them I don't. I really don't. I want to get some of the wounds that are fueling this, and that's what we're looking at.
And given the reality that it isn't primarily about sex, so what is it that the betrayed spouse, typically the wife, needs to understand in order to experience healing?
Well, I think what has to happen with pornography is this incredible educational promotion, very similar to what was done with alcoholism. Today when people look at alcoholism, they don't look at it as a moral failing, they look at it as a disease that needs to be treated. That's the way we need to look at pornography addiction or any addiction. This is a disease that needs treatment. And when we can do that, when we can look at it as a disease, not a moral failing, what we can do is we can take the shame out. Because that is the most painful thing, not only for the addicted person, granted he's feeling a lot of shame, but spouses feel a lot of shame too. What if people found out about this? What would people think of me? What would they think of my husband? Shame is the number one factor that keeps things hidden in the dark, and with that they just grow and fester. But when we look at this as a disease, not as a moral failing, then we can take out the shame and we can treat it the way it should be treated.
There we go. Yeah. No, that makes so much sense. Now, here's one question I want to ask about, guys who might be in denial or what have you. And you've said this before, and I've taken the 3 pillars to purity class that you guys did in Integrity Restored, by the way. And for any priests listening, it's a must do. It's a must do. And we can help you get set up with that. But you could use pornography but not have an addiction.
Yeah.
So how can someone discern that for themselves, or can they discern that for themselves? Is it to the therapist to discern that? How does someone make that kind of determination? If it's a habit or an addiction or what have you.
Again, you're right. Just like a person can have an alcohol problem and not be an alcoholic, a person can have a porn problem and not be a pornography addict. But it really takes the eye of a trained professional to determine that. Really talking to a therapist that's trained in the treatment of addictions to really assess what we're dealing with here, because it can be very tricky with this, But I'll tell you, the hallmark of an addiction is not how often you use the drug. The hallmark is the fact that no matter how hard you try, somehow you always keep coming back to it. Whether it's a couple weeks later or a couple months later, The fact that you always somehow keep coming back to it tells you that, yeah, there's a problem here, and we may be looking at addiction, and it should be checked out by a professional.
Wow, and that could even be whether it's once a day, once a week, once a month.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Hmm.
Interesting. That's a different take than I think a lot of people would like, think of it like, oh, an addict's doing it all the time. Not necessarily.
Yeah.
And then there's other things too, right? Like you're hiding your behavior, you have particular shame about your behavior. I mean, granted, if someone doesn't have shame about using pornography, right, our Catholic sensibility would say, well, you should feel guilty.
Yeah.
But that's really interesting.
Hmm.
Another aspect then for Catholics, you asked about how pornography affects marriages. What about vocations, priesthood, religious life?
Oh, okay.
Certainly, our consecrated people in the Catholic Church aren't free from this either. So, what effects do you see there?
Well, just as if pornography can destroy a marriage, it can destroy a vocation. It really can, because it can totally consume a person's life. And one of the things that we find is that, when it comes to the experience of shame, you know, single people, yes, they experience a lot of shame. Married people, more shame. Priests and religious, they experience the most shame.
Sure.
Because of their vocation, because of their position in society, they are held to a much higher level of accountability and morality. All right, their standards of morality are much higher, and people judge them more harshly with that, much more harshly. So, when a person, whether it's a priest or religious, comes to me struggling with this addiction, they're dealing with an incredible amount of shame. But the sad part is because of that shame, most of them never seek help, and they will often suffer in silence. Now, oftentimes, as with any addiction, when that tolerance develops, you need more of the drug and the stronger form of it. That can lead to other types of behaviors, acting out with other people, which can lead to, if any of that ever becomes public, an incredible scandal. And of course, if the other person happens to be a minor, there could be legal issues. It can be a disaster with this. So for people, priests and religious, there's much more shame, and there's so much more risk with that. So much more risk, and whenever someone, a priest or religious comes to me for help, boy, I say, thank you for coming forward. Thank you. This is so important. And I give them so much credit for doing that, because it took a lot. They had to do a lot to overcome the shame to seek help.
That's fantastic. One of the things, and I don't even know how sensitive a question this might be, but for the priest, for the religious who might just be typically caught up in porn watching and might want to take the step to come to their vicar, their bishop, their superior. What do they stand like? Is that the way to go? Will they be given good help, or are there strategies of work of helping these guys that the institution has right now that aren't effective? Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, what I tell diocesan priests, talk to your vicar for clergy, for religious priests, and religious men and women, brothers and sisters and nuns. Talk to your superior. Because I tell you, I've traveled all over the country and internationally. I've spoken to vicars for clergy and bishops and superiors, and they all want to help these people. There's this fear that if I talk to my vicar or superior, they're just going to kick me out. No, they don't want to kick you out. They want to give you the help that you need. All right, and they are really appreciative when someone comes forward to seek help, because again, there could be a disaster if nothing happens. So when someone comes forward, they're not punished. The vicar or the superior will say, okay, let's get you some help here. Let's get you some help. And that's what happens. So I tell these people, don't be afraid to speak up. Don't be afraid to ask for help, because these people, they want to help you.
That's really good. And the fact that you went around so much of the church and the country speaking about this hopefully did a lot to help these bishops and vicars for priests understand what good treatments and effective treatments are and what's really not necessary, right? I could totally see a guy, a priest, being afraid of either being laicized or shipped off to St. Luke's Institute or something like that, where, if we know that but that probably isn't, typically this doesn't require inpatient treatment, does it?
No, I'd say 90% of the time outpatient treatment is the best for it. And let me tell you, for the 5 years prior to COVID, for about 5 years, I was
Sure.
doing 1 to 2 conferences a month all over the country.
Hmm.
And what that tells me is the very fact that I was asked to speak at so many places tells me that bishops and vicars and superiors, they want to know how to help people. They
Hmm.
want to
Hmm.
know how to help. That's what they're eager to do. So I tell everybody out there, these people, they want to help you. They want to help you. And yeah, there may be some times when residential treatment is needed,
Sure.
but 90% of the time, outpatient actually is better, is the best treatment.
No, that's good. That's really good to hear. So hopefully, any priests, clergy, pastors. I mean, this is a problem on the Protestant side too. Hear that and can can take some consolation from that. I'd love to pivot a little bit to just the reality that those of us who struggle with this, we pray, and obviously prayer and our spirituality, our relationship with God is so important. But in those early stages, you might be tempted to pray, "Oh God, please take this away from me," and for so many, God does not. And yet, could there be a value to the fact that it doesn't go poof? Could there be a value to the struggle? But how can someone reconcile their faith and the persistence of the struggle, and how can they find hope?
Okay, people often ask me this. And here's what I find, most people, when they're struggling with this problem, they turn to God for help, which they should. But their prayer is usually something like, Lord, take it away, take it away, take it away. But then he doesn't take it away. And then they get frustrated with God and think that God doesn't care. Well, the fact is, God does care. The problem is that these people are going at it from the wrong direction. Instead of asking God to take it away, we invite God into it, to walk with us through this healing process. This is where you encounter his healing power, all right? And that means getting help. How does God work in our lives? Through other people. I tell people, if you break your leg, yes, you pray for healing, but you still have to go to the hospital and see a doctor and get a cast on. Right? That's how God works. So this idea that I'm going to take care of it by myself in private and I'm just going to pray it away, that doesn't work. Right? God doesn't work that way. Right? God works through other people. And it's a process. And I tell people, it's also about understanding God's permissive will. There's active will and there's permissive will. Active will, well, the fact that you're breathing and alive, that's God's active will. Permissive will, well, God doesn't want people to suffer, but he allows it because he knows he can bring some good out of it. All right? So when we're walking with him every day in this healing process, guess what? We're also developing a deeper relationship with God. And what's God's number one desire for all of us? To be in a deep, intimate relationship with him. And he's going to use everything he can, even our struggles, to do that. So in this process, what are we going to encounter? Not only the freedom from the addiction, but also a deeper relationship with God. Right? So for me, that's a win-win situation. So
Absolutely.
don't try to pray it away. It's not going to work. Invite God in to walk with you through this. That's where you're really going to experience the change.
That's amazing then, because now what you have is that you have a realization that the man who struggles with purity but is praying every day is in a better position in God's eyes and living who he's supposed to be, right, as people who are meant to be in God, relationship with God, than the man who's pure but may not otherwise pray.
Exactly. And the fact is, when you're doing that, you start to really notice how God is actively working in your life. Right? And he's not abandoned you. He's there every day with you. Through the people you meet, through the encounters you have, all of that. You're going to start to see that. And again, this is where recovery actually gets a bit exciting.
Definitely. And not only do we need God, but we need other people. So what role would you say accountability plays in overcoming this habit or this addiction? And how can someone identify a good accountability partner? And who might be the best candidate for an accountability partner? Is it a priest? Is it a therapist? Is it a friend? Is it somebody anonymous? What do you think?
Okay. Well, accountability is very important, right? Because again, you can't do this alone. We have a saying, there are no Lone Rangers in recovery. You need to surround yourself with other people that understand the struggle, who are going to help you, they're going to support you and keep you accountable. And you do the same for them. It's a team approach. It's that team effort that really makes it worthwhile. And you ask, what makes the best accountability partner? My advice, someone else who also struggles with this. All right, someone who really understands or really knows, because what's going to happen is if they get a negative report, obviously they're going to be calling you up immediately. And instead of waving their finger at you and saying, "What are you doing, you terrible person?" the very fact that they understand what you're going through, they're going to call you and they're going to say, "Hey, what's going on? Are you having a rough time? Is there any way that I can help? What can I do?" All right. That's what makes it effective. Knowing that you've got these people there supporting you, keeping you accountable, all right, but also there to support you. And this is it, And so having that there, having the accountability, having that support is very important. Now, that's not the only thing. I've had people come to me say, well, I'm just going to get covenantized and that's it, and that's going to solve everything. It's not. It's not. But it is a very important component to a comprehensive recovery program that is needed for this, that does include support and accountability.
Yeah, tell us a little more about how you would say software or technology like Covenant Eyes fits into the process.
Okay. Well, first of all, it makes you really think every time you pull out your phone or you pull out your laptop or tablet. What am I doing? What am I doing? Why am I here? What am I doing? Because if you know that if there, anything, even slightly questionable is going to get reported, you're going to think about what you're doing and where you're going and why you're doing this. Am I bored? Am I just going to doom scroll here? Am I stressed out and I just want to disconnect from the world? What am I doing? And then, you have to ask yourself, okay, is this the healthiest thing to do right now? Is this the healthiest thing? What should I be doing? So this is it. So accountability kind of starts the ball rolling in this thought process of where you're going and what you're doing. So it's like you're not saying, okay, well, I'm not going to look at porn because my friend's going to find out about it. You're thinking about, okay, why am I doing this? What is going on here? So like I said, that accountability is kind of a catalyst to get you on the better path.
It's fantastic. So let's kind of look at, we've talked about the person who, I can stop anytime or whatever. Once somebody has the integrity to admit, okay, I have a problem here. I don't know if it's an addiction. I don't know if it's a habit, but I need some help. If that person doesn't know where to start, where should they start?
Well, again, it's finding a therapist who's trained to treat addictions. Could be someone like myself, a certified sex addiction therapist. So if you see the letters CSAT after their name, that's someone that can help. Someone who is even a basic certified addiction therapist, someone with CAC after their name can help. But you kind of have to feel people out because unfortunately, there still are a lot of mental health professionals out there that don't believe that pornography addiction exists. They just kind of think that, well, some people have high libidos. It's like, no. So, but if you do get a CSAT, a certified sex addiction therapist, you better believe they understand sexual addiction and they can really help you with that. So finding someone like that, and there's a website that people can go to for that. The website is sexhelp.com. Now, sexhelp.com is run by the International Institute for Trauma and Addictions Professionals. This is the organization that certifies sex addiction therapists. I went through the whole certification program. Believe it or not, it takes 3 years to do this, to finish the program. But people who are trained in this are thoroughly capable of helping someone struggling with any type of sexual addiction. Now, you wonder, well, what about our Catholic faith? Well, CSATs are trained to incorporate a person's faith life into the healing process. All right. Now, another website that people can go to is called CatholicTherapists.com. And on there, you can find local Catholic therapists in your area. And if you're lucky, it may seem like you're looking for a needle in a haystack. If you're lucky, you can find one that is also a sex addiction therapist. Maybe a little bit difficult, but you may be able to do that. But those are a couple of places where you can find people that will really help you with this addiction. And I'll tell you, any good sex addiction therapist is going to tell you, hey, if you're going to be online anywhere, you need to be monitored. All right, it's a non-negotiable because we know that is what is needed for effective recovery.
One of the things that comes to my mind as we were talking about this, and I think I told you this story before, but I got a call from a diocesan worker who said, "Hey, do you know where I can find a Catholic CSAT?" And you came to mind immediately, and then she's like, "Okay, well, just any more? I want as many options." I mean, like you said, the needle in a haystack part really came to mind because I wasn't able to find a ton of them. But I think the question that this brings up for me is it's good that CSATs are trained to incorporate your faith. But for our listeners, Catholic, Protestant, what have you, how important is it that the therapist have the same faith as you? And I've heard different takes on this from different therapists. What's yours?
Well, um, I believe it is very important because, and I know, unfortunately, we have this division in the church now between Catholics and Protestants. And,
Yes.
what I found that, and I have had a lot of Protestant clients, I actually have. When they go to a therapist who happens to be a Christian Protestant, even if they're not of the same denomination, it still can work very well because there is a lot of
Sure.
overlap. But when it comes to Catholic and Protestant, that can be difficult because, it's not that, one is against the other. It's just that you're coming from two totally different traditions.
Sure.
Someone coming from, let's say, a solid, Orthodox Catholic background may not be able to relate well to a therapist who comes from a Southern Baptist background.
Sure. Sure.
Two very, very different theologies there. So that can be a challenge there. It's not impossible. I know some people are in situations where that's all they can find. Okay, that's great. If the therapist and client are really willing to work together on this, it can be successful.
Sure, definitely. And, in all my time of seeing a therapist individually, my therapist has always been Catholic. But I did spend some time in a group therapy, even when I was in seminary, and that therapist was a Protestant, and he was excellent. It was a great group therapist, right? So it can work. But, I mean, the choice of, going to a group first, I mean, that's a whole other discussion. But, I mean, at the end of the day, it's going to be what's most important to the person. But if you can get somebody of your own faith, that's definitely a bonus.
And the real key is, finding what works. For some people, even though the client and the therapist are of two different faiths, it actually works for them. So
Sure, yeah.
I tell people, don't discount everything. Try whatever is out there, and you'd be amazed at what might happen.
Definitely. All right. Well, I just want to speak to families and parents listening for a while. First, what advice do you have for parents to protect their children from early exposure? Because we both know the average age of first exposure is 9 years old. And then also, how can churches better support families in regard to this whole issue of pornography?
Well, I think it boils down to education. Really educating children. First of all, for young children, we really need to protect them from this. Really do. And there's a lot of good resources out there. There's a wonderful book called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. In fact, there's a couple of different versions of it for different age groups. And I tell parents, this is something you really want to read with your kids. Don't just give them the book and say, here, look at this. No, sit down and read with them to really help them understand that the internet is great, but there's some bad stuff out there.
Definitely.
So it's really about educating them. And then it is protecting them. There needs to be good safeguards, good filters, on the use. And I tell parents that even if you have good filters on the computer and the tablet and the cell phone, you never leave your child alone with the internet. Never. If they're going to be online doing anything, you need to be right with them, right next to them. All right? Because even the best filters in the world are not fail-proof. You never know what might get through. So you really have to be there for them with that, So you have to do that. For teenagers, you really have to educate them. Right? Now, for teens, the filters don't work anymore. And then there's where accountability comes in. But again, it's about educating them. And I tell parents, this isn't about sex. All right? This is about an addictive substance. We need to treat this like drugs and alcohol. And we really need to teach them about this, what this is all about. Now, we also need to teach them about healthy sexuality and healthy relationships and healthy intimacy, that too. Because we know that pornography is going to twist that and really warp their sense of what that is. So it's about, helping them understand what are the dangers of the internet, the dangers of pornography, how it is an addictive substance they want to avoid. And then again, what is healthy sexuality and what are healthy relationships all about? So for the teenagers, it's a lot of education, a lot of it.
Well, fantastic. I know we're coming close on time here, so I'll ask one more question, kind of a two-part question. Number one, how can our listeners connect with you and learn more about your work? Where could they find you online? And then what's a word of encouragement you might have with any of our listeners who are struggling with pornography? What's something they can do today?
The word of encouragement is if you're struggling, you can overcome this. You really can, but you can't do it alone. You need to reach out for help. That's the biggest thing. You need to reach out for help. For couples, let me give you the research on this. for couples whose marriages have been affected by pornography use and addiction, if you don't seek out help, there is a 75% chance of divorce.
Wow.
If you do seek help, there's a 75% chance that you're going to heal your marriage and actually come out even better.
Wow.
So
Staggering.
that's the research there. Those are the stats. Think about that.
Yeah,
So
wow.
as far as finding me, I have two websites. There's my own personal website, peterkleponis.com. There's also my practice, which is integritycounselingpa.com, right? Integrity Counseling PA as in Pennsylvania.com. And you can learn more about our practice.
Well, Dr. Peter, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. Thank you for all of the education you went through and all of the work you're doing on this issue with private clients in your practice, with just in the church throughout the country and throughout the world, having educated so many of our leaders. With the work you do with the great guys at Integrity Restored, definitely a friend ministry of ours at Covenant Eyes. Thank you so much for everything you've done, and thank you for the time. And to our listeners, thank you for listening. If you liked this episode, again, please like, subscribe, comment, get this out there in the algorithms so that more and more people can hear about us, hear about Dr. Peter. So thank you so much for listening. Keep fighting the good fight to stay pure. For all of us here at Covenant Eyes, I am Theo McManigal. God bless you.